I think we're ready to go. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for a little bit of patience while we're kind of working out the technology, making sure we're rolling. So we're the first ones up, so just making sure we got everything in place. So I am Peyton Griggers. I am an executive industry consultant with Hexagon. I've been with Hexagon for about a year. I've been in the reliability and maintenance space since 1993. Started off as a technical superintendent in a textile manufacturing plant, and then went and worked at DataStream when good old days of MP2 was on Paradox back in the early days of having systems, and I built my first system in the mill using Lotus 123. So it's come quite a ways since the early days of doing this. And I've had the pleasure of kind of riding that journey along as it's evolved and matured and become what it is today. So it's kind of fun when you look back and you see the days when nobody had a system, and then all of a sudden everybody needs to get a system, and then you start doing the basics and the fundamentals, and it was all about preventive maintenance, and all of a sudden now it becomes about predictive maintenance, and now it becomes about algorithms and AI telling you what to do. It's really cool to see the journey and the technology and the strategy kind of merge, where the technology can really benefit the strategy now. So it's been kind of a fun journey. We're here today to talk about storeroom secrets. MRO, how it drives profitability and performance. So we'll spend the next 45 minutes or an hour kind of chugging through that. What do we want to accomplish today? So my goal in our communications is to just get a few key points to you. I want to talk about, I'm really going to talk more from a strategy perspective than really getting into specific configuration of EAM or your tools or how they interact together. I want to talk more big picture. So as we kind of go through it, really getting the right establishment of the foundation. You got to have the foundation in place. I love AI, I love all the tools, but if you've got bad data, if you've got bad processes, if everything is in a chaotic state, the technology is just going to feed the chaotic state. So I really want to focus today a lot on the foundations and the strategy of how we approach an MRO storeroom. Okay? Building the team. The team is very important. We'll talk a little bit about the team and what it takes. Being introspective, really understanding where you are, where you're going, and what you need to do to get there. The first conversation I always like to have with a customer in my 30 years when we sit down is, before we even start, is like, what are we trying to accomplish? Who's going to accomplish it? And how are we going to measure success? And that really is the very first fundamental questions that you need to ask as we kind of go through this process. And again, defining that success. We talk about implementing the processes and systems. We'll go into that a little bit deeper. Kind of takeaway number 5 there is measure your performance and drive continuous improvement. I see so many people that will put a lot into the front end of a project, but they really don't put in the analytics, they really don't put in the processes to measure that success and to continuously improve and evolve the process and commit the resources to continuing to improve as you go. And finally, communicate that success, right? When you have success, share it. It's contagious, right? When you see people doing things and getting credit and things are improving, that feeds people, and rewarding that feeds people. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And the first thing I wanted to start with, I kind of ran through this with Jeremy before we did this. And Jeremy looked at it and he said, yeah, it's okay, but get me interested, get me excited, right? Why? So, and I got to think about that, and he had a great point. So there's a great book by Simon Sinek, and I never can get his name right, but it's called Find Your Why. It's a great story. It's a great learning educational opportunity book. I highly recommend it. But why? Why are you doing it? What are you trying to accomplish? So when I started thinking about this, is like MRO is rarely defined as a strategic initiative. It's always an afterthought, right? We got to take care of the equipment. We got to do our preventive maintenance. We need predictive technologies. But how do we feed that, right? So why? So let's look at MRO a little bit deeper today. And these are just some stats to get you thinking about what you do. How many people in here work in the storeroom or directly attributed? Okay, gotcha. So just, you get in there and you get busy and you don't think about the big picture sometimes. Look at the impact that a storeroom has on your maintenance and reliability operations, right? So just starting over here on the left, I used a $500 million company just arbitrarily. That's kind of a mid-size organization. If we look at that, a typical storeroom that has excessive stock, that doesn't have great controls, you've got about $15 million worth of inventory in a $500 million company sitting there. That should command some attention, right? That's at any time. You've got $15 million sitting there. And when we start thinking about that $15 million, excessive carrying costs is around $2 million right off the top of avoidable expenses. So if you're managing it, that's $2 million straight to the bottom line, right? And a company with 10,000 POs a year spends up $2 to $4 million processing and purchasing and procuring and getting those parts and getting that stuff, right? $15 million inventory with 90% accuracy. Most people think 90% is pretty good, right? You got 90% accuracy, you're missing $1.5 million that you don't know where it is. You think about that from a personal perspective. $1.5 million. And again, a little bit makes a difference. Every 1% you reduce of stockouts can literally turn into millions of dollars to your bottom line. 1% on a stockout reduction on a company this size. And then finally, 3% inventory shrinkage, average, and I'm giving you average numbers here across this. The best practice ranges in there, but 3% basically means you're losing $500,000 a year that you don't know where it's going. And that's an average number is 3%. So that's $500,000 there. You got $15 million worth of inventory. You're losing $2 million in avoidable expenses, and you got $1.5 million worth of stuff that you don't know where it is. That should command some attention. So that's why, right? I'm gonna have to talk fast. I can already see it. I always want to frame. I always like to start with the big picture when I'm talking about these discussions and how we go through it. So I stole this from my last company. I made it, so I did give him a little credit down there. Jeremy's like, that's there. I'm like, yep. So you really got the foundation outside, right? We're talking about our asset management organization. We're talking about our safety processes. You input your asset management software, your other systems that feed and tie it. And then you got the whole design for reliability and the engineering aspects that feed into the maintenance and reliability loop. So you've got these external forces that kind of set up the whole framework and governance for your asset management strategy. And then we start getting into the actual strategy, right? So as we're looking at it, we got to get our fundamental data in place and our foundation set up. So, we'll go through, you want to set up your asset registry. We need to determine how critical things are. We need to start looking at, once we know that, what system are we using to feed it? EAM, how are P&ID and asset docs all file into there? How does it interact with the financial system? And then we start building out our plan for executing our maintenance strategies around where we do FMEAs, where we're just going to do some task analysis, where we're going to roll with manufacturer specs, where we're going to run to fail. And then we start executing. So now we got our planning and scheduling, got our execution. We factor in all our safety, all of our planning, all of our unplanned maintenance. And then it's a loop, right? Then we feed right back. So what's missing? Spare parts, right? Right dead in the middle. So if you want to talk about the bones of the operation, I kind of said blood when I was thinking about it. And Jeremy's like, no, it's more like bones, right? They're the things that actually construct and facilitate the movement. And parts of the heartbeat of the whole strategy, right? I have to be able to maintain my assets, and I have to be able to maintain them at the reliability that I need to drive my production and manufacturing goals. So parts are the key to success, right? Without them, you're going to fail miserably. And again, they're always typically an afterthought. So, what do we usually hear? I'm going to run through this really quick. You guys hear this, especially if you work in a storeroom. Finding parts is always difficult. The data's all over the place. It's not standard. I spend all of my day chasing parts. I've got somebody running up to the parts place to get this. I'm having to have a shaft made in an emergency. It's easier just to order the part directly than it is to try to find it. We use that part all the time. How can we not have some of those? Stays in a bin, but it's never there, nowhere to be found. And we have all this stuff, but it's all from 1985. It doesn't work for me. Right? These are typical things that I have always heard over the years in a storeroom. So these are the things that you guys, I'm sure, are dealing with regularly. How do we start to fix that, right? So I want to start with kind of the stakeholders. And this is what you kind of see, I got my little secrets numbered. So one's know the big picture. Two, it's not just a storeroom clerk. And that's kind of the next little pitfall I see everybody fall into. It's not just a storeroom clerk. It's not just a storeroom manager. All these other inputs are going to feed into the success of a storeroom. So where do we kind of start with? We need a plant manager. We need governance. The most important word I think you'll hear this whole conference is governance. Somebody's got to own it. Somebody's got to be responsible for it. Somebody's got to fund it. And you got to measure it. Those things are what it's going to take to make that success. So I need that leadership from my plant manager or enterprise level resources, right? Step two, somebody's got to buy it. So now all of a sudden I've got a purchasing person here who can really bog down my process. Now I've got to look for ideal pricing. I got to look for preferred vendors. I got to look at preferred performance levels. Then I'm going to tie in a reliability engineer because he's got to tell me what he needs. He's designing the systems. He's installing the equipment. He's commissioning it. He's handing it over to operations. He's feeding me the data I need to feed the other side. And then you need a maintenance planner. Somebody's doing all the planning. Somebody's telling you what parts they're going to use, when they're going to use them, how many they need. And Jeremy laughed at this. It takes so many people to run this process, I ran out of clip art, so I had to assign myself a role. So planners and schedulers, and then finally, your supervisors and technicians. They're the ones receiving the parts. They're facilitating the work and executing the work. So it takes a lot of people to make a storeroom successful. And I think all these other resources forget how important they are to the process and how much of an impact they can have on the process. Okay? So, secret number 3, develop a strategic mindset. I got a little quote up here from, and again, I'll say drive success by looking beyond the physical storeroom. That's where I want to go deeper. Everybody stops at issuing and returning. That's just the start, right? So Colin Powell says, success is a result of perfection, hard work, learning from failure, loyalty, and persistence. And I wanted to be famous too, so I put one of mine up right beneath it, and I just wanted to be near Colin Powell. So I think it's a result of commitment, investment, and individual and collaborative demand to settle for nothing less than achieving your objectives, right? It takes your teamwork, it takes commitment. It's going to take you working together. And there may be failures to get to the success. Sometimes the failures are more powerful than the successes. Right? Okay? How do I develop that mindset? These, to me, are the steps that I always use with our customers to help you prepare for deploying a good strategic approach. And I would argue that you could take off the whole storeroom thing and you can just apply this to everything. You can apply this to your asset management strategy. You can apply it to your criticality strategy, to your anywhere you want to in the reliability and maintenance realm. But establish governance and ownership. I kind of hit on that already. Somebody's got to own it. Somebody's got to want to see it successful. Commitment to excellence. You've got to want to get there. If you don't want to get there, you're not going to get there. You got to, to Marty's point earlier, you got to put something down in paper, and then you got to have somebody something to drive towards and push towards. Defining the objectives. What are we trying to do? What's important? What makes us successful? What makes us a failure? We need to document that. We need to write procedures for what we want to do, how we want to do it. Understanding those stakeholders. We talked about all those different roles. What are their roles and what are they responsible for? What should they just be consulted on? What should they be approving? Where should they just be informed? You need to understand that, and that needs to be documented. And everybody, all these collaborative groups need to understand that cohesive structure that you put together. Again, committing financially to achieve those objectives, somebody's got to fund it. Doesn't happen. Storeroom clerks don't come for free, right? But if I've got $2 million worth of lost inventory, I can pay for my storeroom clerk. That's pretty easy to justify, right? Holding everyone accountable. You have to be held accountable for what you're supposed to deliver. Analytically monitoring the status, keeping up with it. How am I achieving it? Celebrate victories, kind of pulling on Marty's theme. Sometimes you got to get on somebody pretty good, but when they win, you win. And you need to make sure everybody knows they win, and you need to celebrate that. We just had our sales kickoff meeting in Dublin, and I was lucky. I got recognized for something, right? You know what it makes me want to do? Work a whole lot harder. In essence, it just makes me want to do more. So recognize people when they have success. Celebrate those victories, right? And then drive that continuous improvement. Okay? So number 4, we want to analyze the symptoms to find the underlying causes. Sometimes we just look at the surface. So that's secret number 4. Right? What we usually see and where it manifests itself is you see inventory accuracy problems. I don't have it, or I have too many, or I got a whole bin full of them, or I've got to go get this shaft turned and made because I didn't have any. I have poor data, so I have the same part in there under 3 manufacturers in 6 different ways, and I've got the bearings all over everywhere, and I don't know what's going on. And then cost management. I'm not tracking. Am I analyzing that performance? Do I know what I'm spending? Do I know my volumes? Do I know how to harmonize across different sites? So these are the 3 places where you tend to see the problems. Now, what are causing the problems? So first thing you need to look at is those surface level issues, right? So we start seeing poor inventory. We have data quality problems. We can't find anything. We have duplicates. We have process controls. How do you control your stock? Do you have written processes and process flows for how your stock comes in, how it's received, how it's moved? Does it start at the warehouse? Does it come to the inventory supply room? When you pull it in, where do you put it? You have special rules for chemicals. All these things should be processes and procedures that you have documented so that your resources know what to do with them. Excessive stock, right? I have all this obsolete material. When you guys retire an asset, how many people actually go through the process of going to the stock room, looking at the bill of materials, and removing obsolete stock? There you go, right? And interdepartmental support, and that's kind of where I get back to we're all a team here, and we all have to work together for this to fundamentally be successful. So there's our issues when we're struggling with it. Now here's our root causes, right? So now we got to look at those stock levels. Do we have the right reorder levels in place? Do we have our min-maxes set up if we use the min-max method? Do we have critical spares identified? Do we know what's critical? Do we know what needs that safety stock? Then there's our process, right? We have poor processes, we get poor results. You get out what you put in, right? And we have our issue process. How do we control that? Is the storeroom controlled? When it's not controlled, how do I make sure that things are getting documented and captured? Do we have parts associated? We have our bills of materials fleshed out? Has reliability and maintenance helped build those lists so that I know what parts go with what assets? And then finally, do I have control? Is everything everywhere? Do I have controlled locations? Do I have a barrier around the physical storeroom? Do I not? How many satellite stores do I have? How much stuff is in the maintenance superintendent's office? We have to control. Okay? So these are some of those systemic problems that we're going to come across. So secret number 5. Now we got to get a little bit deeper. What are your unique operational challenges, right? Because every industry is kind of different. You got to understand your vertical, you got to understand your market. And my whole point here is a manufacturing and a process type organization. So if I'm in a pharmaceutical or food and beverage or a typical discrete manufacturing type situation, I've got a different challenge than if I'm oil and gas and I've got fields distributed out across oil fields and I've got guys running around in trucks. I've got different types of inventory situations I have to manage, which is different from an EV charging station. So you look like an EV Go. They've got charging stations strategically all over the United States. Now I need centralized stores located in certain parts of the country with critical spares on hand that I can get to a region quickly. So you start having these different kinds of challenges that you need to identify and capture specific to your situation. Offshore, that's a whole nother beast, right? Now all of a sudden something fails and I'm 3 hours ride on a helicopter to get something somewhere. Jeremy's lived with some of that in the past. So, secret number 6, what are my ingredients for success, right? And you'll start to see kind of a common theme here. So we start with those optimized process controls, right? So we're going to need to go build out our process controls. Data is the key to everything. So we need to standardize data. We need to start looking at our storeroom design. Is it designed optimally? What are my constraints? Do I need different storeroom conditions and configurations? Do I have what I need to be able to track and manage all my material correctly? We start talking a little more advanced. Now start about kitting and staging. And what's my process as a storeroom clerk to feed my maintenance planners and feed my supervisors? Do I have dedicated areas for staging, for kitting? How early do I pull the kits? How do I get the information? What's the process for feeding that to me? Then I need to handle my buy asset materials a little bit different. Maybe I got 100 pumps out here running around that I can repair and move and track as kind of rotating assets or spares that go in and out of service that I want to track the performance and the life cycle on. So how do I manage those and where do I keep those? How do I manage the performance of those? Then we transition a little bit and let's start looking we talked about what drives that. So again, who owns it? Somebody's got to own it, right? Doesn't have to be the person at the top of the company. A storeroom clerk can own it, but they have to be empowered and they have to have control and they have to drive, right? And then finally, personnel and SME optimization. Are my people trained? Do they understand the tools? Do they understand the processes? Do they know the nuances? Do I have a backup person trained that can back up and augment and fill in that's ready to help and support special initiatives? So how do I get my framework in place for my team that's going to help deliver that? Then we get to the financial piece of it, right? So we wrap all that up with those metrics that we were talking about. What's the value of my inventory? And why is that value what it is? What does it need to be? What's optimal for that value, right? I start applying EOQ analysis. So now if I've got good data and I'm capturing those transactions, I can now start to forecast and predict and identify what I need to have and how many I need to have. And that empowers us to do things on a bigger scale and control that stock. And then finally, your ABC analysis. Again, how can I further categorize that data? What's my most critical inventory versus my common inventory items, or stuff I may even want on consignment or vendor managed that I don't want to manage at all? And finally, enterprise cost optimization. So when I get these things in place, now I can look strategically. I have high dollar parts. I may not need to keep 15 of them at one plant. Maybe I keep some regionally throughout the country in strategic areas that I can move around, know what the lead time is, I know what the criticality is, can save a lot of money by optimizing that stock. Okay? Secret number 7, your data is the secret sauce. That's ultimately, you're just fighting a battle that you're never going to win if you don't get control over this. So you've got to get a process in place to control the data, control the nomenclature, control the standardization. And again, we start talking about standardization. What does everybody always immediately think of? Well, you guys are making me talk too much. Descriptions. That's what I always hear. We need to standardize our data. Description is not going to fix everything, right? It goes way beyond an inventory description. It goes way beyond the storeroom. All the pieces have to be in place for me to be successful. A little note, I tried to throw some metrics in here as we kind of go through this. MRO spending can reach 20% of the plant budget. Again, it's worth investing in. It's worth putting some money and time into optimizing those costs, right? So we start talking about data. MRO data drives efficiency. It helps us reduce the downtime. We have our dashboard analytics. We need to be measuring that success. We need to be measuring those inventory turns. We need to be measuring those stockouts. We need to feed that. We have to have the data, the transactional history, the KPIs set up, or we can't do that. So the data is the foundational element for all those dashboards. BOMs and critical spares. This is where the reliability and maintenance guys come in. What do you need? How do you know you need it? How do you know how critical it is? Do you need safety stock? What's the lead times on this? There's a big piece of the team and the data standardization that is not just having a manufacturer and a part number. It's all the strategy behind what I need. And again, enterprise level data, we talked a little bit about that, just pulling it across the enterprise and being able to pull everything together. Time here. We got plenty. So, secret number 8, define the process, the policy, and the execution procedures. So as we start to go through it, you really need to treat your storeroom like a bank. We've already talked about the number of dollars that's involved in it and the lack of control around that kind of money. What would your spouse do to you at home if you had that kind of stuff just flying around and you had no idea where it was or no controls over it? You need to control your storerooms, right? That doesn't mean you have to have somebody in there 24 hours a day, under lock and key, can't touch anything. Some people don't have the personnel and the resourcing and the business model to support that. But you still have to have a process to control that stock leaving that room. And it has to be diligent, and people have to stick to it and have to be bought in, right? So you have to have those controls in place. Anything that comes in, goes out, or transfers must go through a transactional process, right? To me, that transactional process should be a work order. We can talk about cost centers and issuing to employees and some of the unique setups around having to do that, but I highly encourage you. I'm a big asset lifecycle cost person. If you don't charge it to a work order, you cannot effectively track the performance of your asset. Everything should go through a work order. Don't care what it is. It needs to go to a work order. Finally, all issues with accuracy is a process failure or a lack of communication. It's somebody running in there at 2 o'clock in the morning and grabbing 6 bearings, and that's the last 6 that you got. And they're in a hurry because the machine's down, it never gets put in. Got to have that communication, and you got to be able to facilitate the transactions quickly. And that all breaks down into 3 components. And I kind of break it down into process, configuration, and communication. You just see a few items here to kind of hit through, and we'll go a little bit deeper in that on the next screen. But process. Do you have written processes for all of these? Because you should. It may sound simple, but you need to document it. You need to understand it. Your team needs to understand it. Everybody needs to know the process these things go through for all of these different types of areas, right? And obsolescence is one that gets missed a lot. Don't forget that. There's a lot of money sitting in storerooms because of poor obsolescence procedures. Configuration, how do we have the storeroom designed? What is our configuration of the storeroom? Does it facilitate success? And finally, communication, just all the communication between the teams and all these stakeholders that we've kind of talked about. Get a little deeper into that. We need to go through and build these out, right? $10 million inventory, we're missing $1 million worth of stock. So I need those processes documented. I need the storeroom properly staffed. That may not be 24 hours a day, but I need enough people in there to control it, to facilitate and execute and govern those processes. And we need to know what those roles are, what all the pieces and components of those roles and those tasks are, and where the handoffs are that we're doing it. And again, the physical storeroom. We just did a project I was involved in a year and a half ago, and we basically had to tear the whole storeroom down, reconfigure everything, reset up all the bin structures, and redo everything, because you just couldn't get anything. You couldn't find anything. It wasn't organized. Nothing was grouped in any manner that made any sense. It was just where things had been placed, right? Okay. Next, defining a stocking strategy. So I have to lay this out, right? What are my critical components? We talked a little bit about those bills of materials, the critical spares. How do I classify my parts? What do I need to classify my parts correctly? Right? How do I commission an asset? How do I get those parts when we commission a new asset or we commission a new line or a new system? What's the process to feed me that data? And what needs to go in and what doesn't need to go in? What do I need to stock? That collaboration again. Again, that replenishment, sometimes it's got to be a swag at first, but it should come through good analysis of the asset, like assets. But then I start to build that history, and then I can use that history to help me determine those min and max, use that EOQ analysis and those stocking levels to feed everything. And finally, how do I track my cost? Because in the end, that's really what it's all about, right? We want to maximize the uptime of the asset. We want to maximize the life of the asset. We want to minimize what it costs to have that asset perform in that desired state over the lifetime. So we always want, it's all about making money in the end, right? I need to deploy these tools and AI tools, all the stuff within EAM to help you drive the cost optimization. All right, secret number 9, establishing the business value and measuring results, right? Again, now I'm getting to the meat. What am I trying to accomplish? How am I going to measure success, right? These are just some typical ROI values in the stockroom. Again, just to show you the significance, a little bit of progress makes a lot of change, right? So if you look at inventory stockouts, a typical range is 3 to 10%. Now, I don't have the absolute best practice on there. I've put in the median practice and range for most of these, did a good bit of research, looked at some old decks. But most companies are between 3 and 10% when you look at inventory stockouts and production costs. That turns in, from a revenue standpoint, $15 to $50 million that can be caused by stockouts if your stockout levels are high enough. So driving that poor safety stock, not having those controls, parts along lead time, stuff I can't get, flying stuff in. Excessive stock is another big opportunity. We talked a little about that. Typically, 5 to 20% of a stockroom is excessive stock. So again, I've got another $500,000 to $2 million sitting there that really I don't need, I'm never going to use. Some of it's obsolete. Some of it's stuff that's very low turns. How do I track and improve that excessive stock? And then it translates into maintenance hours too, right? If I don't have parts, I can't work, I'm losing efficiency. I'm losing progress that my planners and schedulers, I'm bogging them down, I'm bogging down my supervisors, my technicians can't perform the work. There's another 1.8 to 4.5 million if you look at average typical ranges. So we usually see 6 to 15% loss of efficiency in there. Average wrench time in a company is 25 to 40%. And most of that downtime is because we don't have parts or we don't have a good plan in place. Okay. Maintenance spend, 3 to 10% of the revenue. So they're significant numbers. And then finally, emergency orders. We need to get out of chasing fires, right? You look at that, 10 to 30% of orders in an average storeroom, and again, I'm in a $500 million company, are emergency orders. And if you look at the cost, it costs 20 to 50% more to process an emergency order. You got less items on it, you're scrambling trying to get it, you're expediting shipping, you're scrambling. So the normal cost is $200 to $400 per purchase order when you put everybody's effort, labor, and everything into it. When I add another 25 to 50% of that, it gets very significant. So, can I make a difference changing my storeroom around? Can I make a difference spending some money, committing some resources, putting processes in place? There's a lot of money sitting there. A lot of money sitting there. How do we measure? We talk about KPIs, dashboards, and analytics. So I just wanted to give you guys kind of some of the typical ones that I'd recommend for managing a storeroom. You start to look and build these out and build out your dashboards. These are just things that will help you manage the track, and I kind of gave you the ranges of percentage depending on where you are in your maturity and where you want to go. So you need to be measuring your stock value as a percentage of your replacement asset value. What's my overall cost I'm holding in stock compared to what the value of my assets are? That number gets too high, I need to be looking to replace some assets because I'm turning a lot of parts, keeping a lot of inventory. Inventory turns should be from 1 to 3. The higher the number, the better on your turns for your stock. Stock accuracy, 95 to 99. We've already heard what 90 can do. So if I cut that in half, even to get to the 95 percentile, I've made a significant change. The stock outs from 2 to 5. Parts issued to a work order should be 95% or greater. I would argue that it should be 100%. And then items issued, and then some things we just want to trend, right? How's my stock room evolving over time? Is it growing? Is it shrinking? What's my inventory value? How am I controlling it? So there's not necessarily a right number on it, but how many items do I receive a month? Is that trending up? Is it trending down? How many items am I issuing? So if I'm receiving more than I'm issuing, my stock is building. I've got more money tied up in my inventory. If I go the other way, I may not have enough supply. So a very fine metric to track those received and issued items. How many new items am I adding regularly? Why? What's driving those new items, right? Number of storeroom transactions. Is my storeroom getting busier? Is it getting less efficient, more efficient? And then what's that total value? So how many dollars am I sitting on in that storeroom every year? All right, and finally, I just kind of wanted to give you a case study. So the last final secret, proof's in the pudding, right? Measure success, talk about success, celebrate success. This is a project I was my team was engaged in. It's about 2 years old now. But this was a food and beverage company. We went in, did a MRO storeroom assessment, put together a plan for them to improve, change, modify, optimize it. We built all these strategies out, put procedures in place to do it. If we're looking at it, our goal there was to improve the inventory accuracy. We wanted to implement a stronger cycle count program. We wanted to improve costs, all the things we're talking about. Procedures needed refining, improving the communication, having the right metrics in place, and we redesigned the physical storeroom as well as part of this. We literally ordered bins, we changed out all the bin structure, we barcoded everything, we physically redeveloped the storeroom and modeled it to be effective, right? So, solution, we did that assessment, we developed the operating procedures, we set up that governance program, we set up a governance team that met quarterly to review the governance procedures and goals and outputs and what was next for it. They met quarterly. We redesigned the storeroom. Stock relocation effort. We found $1.2 million in stray parts in 6 months. We found over $1 million of stuff they had no idea they even had. We cleaned it up. We paid for the whole project just with what we found on the stock. Okay? Reduced part downtime by 30%. These are real numbers. They're not ones I just made up. We actually built the metrics and started tracking the performance. So reduced it by 30%. We rewrote all the SOPs to facilitate the processes. New personnel configuration. We did specific storeroom training. We came up with cheat sheets for the issue return process. Everything we needed to feed and continuously feed that. They actually stole my consultant that I had helping do the improvement, and they hired him to run the storeroom. So that happens too, right? And then the accuracy. We went from 45% to 98%. And we know 6 months later, they were still running 98 to 99%. That was the one good thing about them stealing our resources. I was able to keep up with the performance and how it was tracking. So we saw sustained success with that process, right? So you can make a difference. And the thing I want to say is it doesn't take but one person to change it. You can be the storeroom clerk, you can be the storeroom manager. If you're in here and you work in MRO and you don't want to make it better, you're in the wrong place, right? Get excited about what you're doing. You can save real money. You can make a huge difference to your company and their profitability by focusing on these things. And you don't have to eat it all at once, right? You can't standardize your data in 2 weeks, right? But you can build a plan. I can start looking at what's critical. I can have my reliability guys, let's do some critical spare part assessments. Let's start looking through. Let's start challenging these. Let's put in an obsolescence program, get rid of and write off some of this old stock. Do something. And one person makes a difference, right? These are just some more pictures of kind of the physical aspects of the storeroom that we clean. You can kind of see the befores and afters and the cleaning and some of the progress there. And then finally, just kind of sum it up, right? So what are those secrets for success? Just kind of button them up for you in a nice slide to kind of give you the overview. So, MRO is critical. More than a clerk, look beyond the physical storeroom. You need to get these other people engaged and helping you and contributing and focused, and they need to see the success. If you're making your planner more efficient and if you're keeping your supervisor from chasing parts, they're going to be happy. When they see success, they're more likely to help you, right? Analyze the symptoms, determine your unique needs and processes that we need something special for. What are our ingredients for success? We saw all the links in the chain. Your data. Data is everything. One of the biggest lessons I ever learned early in my career is we did a huge pharmaceutical deployment, and the project manager, we were doing a huge walk down, like of 4 physical campuses. A lot of problems with the data. A lot of problems with the data. And the project manager through this project, he just kept saying, it's just data. It's just data. Data's everything. Don't care how good your system is. If your data's crap, you're going to get crap. So invest in standardizing, right? Define your processes and follow them. Hold people accountable for them. Talk about the business value. Put the metrics in place to measure the business value. That's the key. I see a lot of efforts. I see a lot of people put the time in up front, but they really don't put in the analytics to know how they're doing, and they don't go back to the analytics to know how to improve. So invest in the measurements, in what you're trying to accomplish, and there are different measurements for different people, right? Your reliability engineer needs some storeroom metrics that he's accountable for. I need to track what my critical spares are. Is that number increasing or decreasing? How's he performing getting that to me? How many of my bills of material parts are on an average bill of material? Hold them accountable for feeding you data. You have metrics for all that. It's very easy if you're using the tool in the system to build these analytics to show you and feed you. And then the proof's in the pudding. Celebrate success. Put them on the boards. Marty was talking about having a sign up at the customers. Put them on the boards, man. Have a board. Celebrate those successes. You do a case study like this, it should be up there for everybody to see. It should be in your newsletter. You should be talking about it at your plant manager. You should be celebrating that to the whole team in your quarterly meetings. Celebrate success. I promise you, if somebody thinks they're doing a good job, they will work harder. Okay. All right, that's kind of where I stopped. So. Definitely want you all to join us at Hexagon Live. You'll probably see that 200 times over the next 2 days. But we'd love to have you guys there. Any questions or anything I could help with? Love to meet all of you, so let's grab me somewhere and pull me off to the side. Yes, sir.
So I'm trying to get this working, and we do a lot of P card purchasing.
Terrible. I hate P cards.
So, and it's because we have 30, 40 sites throughout the county, state, so guys around running. How do you go to Jones Hardware and purchase playing P's? Just trying to figure out a good solution to capture those costs.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we do have quite a bit that is standard stock, pump tubes, things like that there. But this whole P card thing is just, I've never dealt with it in my past.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure where to start.
Mm-hmm. It's very hard to get controls when you got people running around just buying whatever.
And everyone's told me about, we're kind of going into the whole asset
Mm-hmm.
journey as actually you got that cost. The whole thing is a cost. So it's like, how do I get those into the work or into something, start tracking? There's challenges.
Yeah.
How do you want to meet those challenges? How do you really, that's one of our goals this year, try to get that started.
Yeah. I always say start with a workshop, right? Get your, find the people who use them the most. Grab them, pull them in a room, sit down with them. What drives me having to use a P card? What's the criteria that triggers it being something? Map out a process. Map out your conditions that require you to have to use it. Why am I having to use it? Is that appropriate? Some stuff probably makes sense to go get with a P card, maybe, right? And especially if I'm distributed and I'm mobile. But again, can I reduce the number of that? Do the mobile units have the ability to keep some stock? Do you have trucks? What are they stocked with? Let's start looking for the underlying cause that's driving the requirement and see if we can eliminate the cause to whatever extent we can. But then when we have to do it, let's build a process to get the data off of that P card and onto a work order, right? And again, I think it's just that the tools are there, the technology's there now. You got the transactions electronically. Let's go get those transactions, pull it in, figure out how we tie that to the appropriate work we're working on or track. And it's really those things are kind of fun because you just sit down and work through the process. And that's the key, is just mapping out the cause and effects. And then the technology will kind of fall in place when you start seeing the decision trees. Yeah. Yeah. And then track it, right? I'd have a metric. What's my P-card spend? What's my P-card spend by department? Where am I having problems, you know?
That's just, here again, we've got so many different softwares that do just this a little bit, trying to put that package together.
Mm-hmm.
That's 2 years.
Yeah.
That's my, I mean, the radar MRO has done that for years.
Yeah.
I think this product does a great job of everything, but this is really a challenge.
Yeah.
Really like this thing.
Yeah. It'd be fun to. I like working through that kind of stuff. I love making the flows. Yeah. Anybody else? Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it, everybody.